My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. There are several times in our lives that we go through major changes, often questioning our path and purpose. Sacred astrology will provide a lantern in the dark at these crossroads. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Danielle Blackwood, offers guidance for every major astrological transit with a variety of self-care tools, including journal reflections, therapeutic rituals, crystals, herbs, and the empowerment that comes from understanding. Danielle Blackwood is a professional astrologer with more than 30 years' experience, as well as a registered counseling therapist. She's the author of the best-selling book, The 12 Faces of the Goddess. Her website is danielleblackwood.com, and she joins me this week to share her path and new book, A Lantern in the Dark. Navigate life's crossroads with story, ritual, and sacred astrology. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Danielle Blackwood. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you so much for having me today, Victor. I'm excited to be here.
And thank you for joining us and sharing your wisdom and all of your work. Please share with our listeners your path and how it led to your calling.
Sure. Well, I've been drawn to the esoteric since I was very young. When I was in 8th grade, I found a paperback copy of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck in a free book bin at the library, and not having any such store that actually sold real tarot cards in our tiny town, I carefully cut the black and white images out of the book and created my very first tarot deck, which I hid in my closet under a carpet for fear that my conservative parents would discover it. So that was my first foray into the esoteric, and it opened up a whole new world that I didn't even know existed until that moment. So when I ran away from home from what was you would call it an abusive home at 17, I found my way to the big city, and I ate, slept, and breathed astrology and tarot and spent whatever extra money that I could conjure on books. I did tarot readings for friends, and I cast my first astrology charts the old-fashioned way, which was without a computer. I did them all by hand, doing mathematical calculations armed with a protractor, an ephemeris, and an old atlas. And finally, I met a local astrologer who took me under her wing, and I became her apprentice. And then I would imagine that it's important to add that years later, during my Saturn return, I was working in London, England, and on a break, I made my way to the between the worlds town of Glastonbury. And there I was swept away by what I found and became initiated in an Avalonian tradition. And then one night back home in Canada, I was unable to sleep because of an agonizing toothache. And I went down to find a book to read, and my hand passed over the shelf, and I fell on Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Women Who Run with the Wolves. And I'd had that book on my shelf for many years, but it never seemed like quite the right time to read it. But that night, I began reading where it fell open, and I read until the sun came up. And by morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. I was literally vibrating with a renewed sense of purpose, and everything just seemed to fall into place. So from there, I completed the high school equivalency tests, and I resumed my education where it was interrupted all those years ago when I was 17, when I ran away from home. And at this point, I was raising my young son on my own and going to school with zero financial support. And there were times that I thought it would never end, but I knew that it was all part of the work. And if I was to help anyone else, I needed to go through that road of trials. So when I finally graduated at 36 years old, it was like crossing a very important threshold. And from there, I continued to deepen my studies on astrology and Jung and started building a practice in conjunction with counseling. So that's sort of the long and short of it.
Tell us about your work as a transpersonal therapist.
I do work as a transpersonal therapist, as you say. So I bring in the spiritual with my counseling. That's a big part of what I do. I am not really a regular kind of counselor. I'm more into depth psychology, a Jungian approach, and I do utilize symbol systems such as astrology in my work as a counselor.
Jung coined the term synchronicity, meaning a meaningful coincidence without other substantiation. Is that something that's occurred in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Many times over. I try to watch for synchronicity every day in all my interactions with everyone I meet. And just walking in nature, you can sometimes find synchronicities that show you the way forward.
I can honestly say that when my spiritual path reopened in my mid to late 30s, it was one synchronicity after another, and quite a blessing that put me into the position that I aspired to and the spiritual growth that I aspired to. So I'm grateful for synchronicities.
Oh, yes.
Many people in the U.S. are not aware of the heinous Scottish witch hunt that began in the 1500s, or the database that exists to help people locate ancestors from that time. How did you discover that you had an ancestor who was put to death for being a folk healer?
Yeah, I've always been obsessed with genealogy and tracing my roots. So I'd been building family trees for many years. But several years ago, I did start on a journey through my family's origins through DNA testing and more family tree exploration. And I was lucky to have a friend who studied genealogy in university, so that was invaluable, and this person really helped me. So through my research, as you mentioned, I discovered that one of my ancestors was tried and executed for witchcraft in the Scottish Highlands during what is called the Great Scottish Witch Hunt of 1597. That's the first witch hunt. There were many others that happened after that. So during this first one, it is estimated that close to 200 people were put to death between March and October of that year. So many of them, including my own ancestor, were given the mercy of being strangled, which is hardly considered a mercy, but before being burned publicly. And like many of the accused, she was a practitioner of folk healing. And even though I have personally identified as a witch for decades, and I'm more than familiar with the history of oppression of people named as witches throughout Europe's history, it really hit me in a profound way. And just knowing that someone whose DNA I carried in my own body really was a profound wake-up call. So there is a database. It's the University of Edinburgh, and there is a lot of information on there. So people of the Scottish diaspora who live in North America or Australia or other places can go there. And if you do have some information of your own family tree, some names and places, you can use that in conjunction with that database to find out some really interesting information. So I do give humble thanks and heartfelt gratitude to live in a time where I am free to follow my own calling as a healer without fearing for my life.
Did that persecution and what you found out about your ancestor become visceral for you?
Oh, it sure did. It was absolutely, it became very real. And I have been to Scotland before, but not since I found that information out. And I am planning a trip later this year to go to the actual town where this person lived. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing what I feel there.
I wonder if making that trip and bringing that energy with you will sort of bring a healing about for that.
That's a really good point. I would love that to be the case. So I am hopeful that can be a potential.
Wonderful. Now, your practice is sacred astrology. What is sacred astrology, and how does it differ from other practices? Well,
the first thing with sacred astrology to understand is that It is a spiritual path. And I know that that can be a bit of a surprise to some people who maybe their only exposure to astrology has been on online or sun sign columns and that sort of thing. But sacred astrology is a spiritual or philosophical path, and it can provide a rich and embodied sense of meaning and purpose, which helps us to glimpse the archetypal patterns that run beneath our everyday lives. It's important to remember with sacred astrology that, with most astrology really, that it is a symbolic language of energy. And when we come to see how its patterns are aligned with the changing seasons, it becomes a language that aligns us with the divinity in nature and our own deeper selves. It's connected to archetypes in mythology and folklore, and it reflects on how these stories play out in our own lives to deepen our self-awareness and our sense of the numinous, which can give us a sense of the magic and the mystery beneath the mundane. So at its heart, sacred astrology is spirit expressing itself through archetype and story.
And how does sacred astrology help those navigating life's crossroads?
Yeah, I think that whether or not we realize it, we all play out stories from myth, legend, fairy tale, and folklore. And in astrology, there are certain thresholds that we all cross around the same ages, which will bring up specific archetypal themes. And these rites of passage are significant chapters that do shape our own sacred story. So each of the significant passages that I write about in A Lantern in the Dark has a powerful purpose to help us move forward on our soul's journey and to teach us the lessons that we came here to learn and to nudge us onto the path that we're meant to be on. But it can also feel sometimes that we've entered the dark wood when we come to these junctures. And I think that while we experience countless transits or energy cycles throughout our lives, there are several that are game changers. And those are the ones that I do talk about in A Lantern in the Dark.
What inspired A Lantern in the Dark?
Well, my clients, actually. So as I was saying, in astrology, there are certain thresholds that we all cross around the same ages that bring up specific archetypal themes. And over the years that I've done this work, I've noticed that clients often come to see me for the first time when they're at one of those crossroads. So for example, there are 4 midlife transits, which occur between approximately 37 and 48-ish. And it's a time when many people do find themselves, for one reason or another, in that proverbial dark wood. So that's what inspired me to write this book. I find that ultimately people are searching for something that resonates at a soul level when they come to these thresholds, and they're looking at their own life story to this point and questioning the deeper meaning that's woven into it. And for years, I'd given my clients writing reflections, reading suggestions, personal therapeutic rituals, ideas for herbs and plant medicine that might help at various junctures, essential oils, crystals to meditate with. And then one day I thought, since everyone experiences these thresholds in similar ways at around the same age, I should put all this material into a book, into one handy place where people can find alternative ways to understand and navigate those crossroads. So A Lantern in the Dark, so to speak.
And the cover of the book is a beautiful cover, and it shows a woman holding a lantern in the darkness, illuminating the darkness. Is that what you're doing?
I hope so. That's my intent, is to illuminate those dark nights of the soul that we all cross through at different times in our lives.
Now, the subtitle is Navigate Life's Crossroads with Story, Ritual, and Sacred Astrology. Who are the deities associated with those crossroads, and how may they assist us on our paths?
Well, For the first and second Saturn returns, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, I chose to use the Slavic Baba Yaga as a guide because she is a Saturnian teacher, if ever there was one. So she is the archetypal wise elder living alone in a cottage in the woods. And not only is she aligned with the Saturnian motifs of time, death, fear, and the cycles of life, she's also aligned with the idea of consequences for avoiding the work, which is what can happen during Saturn times. So archetypally, Baba Yaga is a wise teacher, an initiatrix, and goddess who embodies the wild forces of nature and the cycles of time. And she has the ability to literally stop us in our tracks if we're not doing the work to move on to the next step in our lives. The other that I've used is the story of the goddess Inanna's descent and return from the underworld. She's a Mesopotamian goddess, actually the oldest recorded deity in the world. Her stories are over 5,000 years old. So I use her story to illustrate the common motifs that can arise during the 4 midlife transits. Her story is timeless, it's archetypal, a powerful symbolic metaphor that resonates with anyone who has ever found themselves in a dark night of the soul, regardless of gender. And midlife can be a time when hidden aspects of the self emerge, causing us to descend into our own underworld for a time, and later resurface deepened and hopefully wiser than before.
Tell us a little bit more about that descent into the underworld for Inanna.
So basically, what happens is Inanna is known as the queen of heaven and earth. And she hears something from outside her consciousness. And she listens and she thinks, what is that? And she decides to go down into the underworld to visit her sister Ereshkigal, who is queen of the underworld. Now, it needs to be said that no one has ever made the pilgrimage to the underworld and come back before, but she does it because she is queen of heaven and earth. So she decides to go down, and there are 7 gates to the underworld, and at every gate, the guardian of the underworld, Nettie, stops her in her tracks and asks her to relinquish one of the 7 May or talismans that she carries in order to be admitted into the underworld. So at the first gate, she has to take off her crown. At the second gate, she has to put down her scepter, and so on and so forth, until she, as it says in the original myth, is naked and bowed low in the underworld before her sister. In the underworld, her sister is not happy that she's come down. It's not her realm. And mythologically and archetypally speaking, her sister Ereshkigal is actually the shadow self of Inanna. And it is a part of her that has been abandoned and relegated into this place where the sun does not shine. So Ereshkigal is angry that she's come down, and she strikes her dead and hangs her on a peg on the wall to rot. It's just quite vibrant imagery. So to make a long story short, 2 little androgynous beings are summoned to sprinkle the food of life on Inanna, and thus reviving her. She's been hanging on this hook, and now she is awakened, and Ereshkigal allows her to go, and she goes back up to the top side world and must provide a sacrifice in her stead, because no one leaves the underworld without providing a sacrifice, so they say. So she does. So the whole story is about the descents that we make, the ways that we, when we come to those dark underworld places in our lives where we have to relinquish parts of ourselves in order to really see what's in front of us. So sometimes that is youth or beauty or all of those things that kind of like identify us in the top side world. Those things cannot come with us when we go on our own underworld passages and journeys. It is a long and complicated Sumerian, Mesopotamian stories. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. But I think that a lot of people who are going through those passages do feel a lot of those motifs. And then that idea of arising and coming back to the surface tempered and with more knowledge and wisdom than we would have had we not made that pilgrimage into that place.
And the metaphor for us in modern times is letting go of the baggage that we've accumulated in that first part of our life and then making way for something new and beautiful to come.
I would think so, yes. Things that do not serve us anymore. Things, old, outdated ideas of who we are. But yes, out of baggage that we cannot carry with us into that next phase of our lives. Excellent way to put it.
My guest is Danielle Blackwood. Her new book, A Lantern in the Dark, Navigate Life's Crossroads with Story, Ritual, and Sacred Astrology. Danielle, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and all of your wonderful work.
You can get the book anywhere fine books are sold. It will be at all of the chain stores as well as your local booksellers. And I would suggest and hope that you try local bookstores first. It's also available, of course, on Amazon, online, and through the publisher Llewellyn Worldwide.
And your website?
And my website is danielleblackwood.com.
And we'll be back with more of Danielle and A Lantern in the Dark after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes. Co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that we can give our daughters everything they need to grow and learn, but not every child can focus on classes and play dates.
Nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. face hunger. That's 1 in 6. School lunch might be their only meal each day, and it's heartbreaking to imagine any child going to bed hungry. We're dreaming of a perfect day when kids can smile, play, and just be kids without worrying about where their next meal will come from. Feeding America is working to make that perfect day a reality.
Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste. That food is given to families and children in need. Being a kid should be about doing things that make an ordinary day extraordinary. Learning to play an instrument, building a sandcastle, hosting tea parties. Hunger should never be an obstacle to growing up.
You can help end childhood hunger in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people with different political views and life experiences are coming together through the power of conversation, and it feels good. Hear more at lovehasnolabels.com/one-small-step. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Danielle Blackwood, her book, A Lantern in the Dark, Navigate Life's Crossroads with Story, Ritual, and Sacred Astrology. Danielle, in the first segment, you touched upon these transits, these Saturn returns and midlife transits. In part one of the book, you share what about the Saturn return and how it has its effect on us. Please tell us more about that.
Absolutely. So the first major milestone in the human lifespan is the Saturn return, which people experience between around the ages of 27 and 30. So Saturn, what it means is that Saturn is literally returning to the place that it was at our birth by sign and degree. And that happens every 29 and a half years. So in astrology, Saturn is the reality principle. It's related to Capricorn, and it's associated with milestones, responsibility, aging, and maturity. We have a Saturn return around the age of, like I said, the first one happens around 30. Then we have a second Saturn return between 58 and 60. And if we're lucky enough to live that long, we get a third and final Saturn return around the age of 90. So the first Saturn return around 30 is typically felt as a reality check that asks us how we've structured our lives to this point. It's often a sobering, serious, and contemplative time that can bring challenges and trials and a realization of time that we might not have noticed until now. A lot of people have been coasting through their 20s and suddenly say, oh my goodness, I'm almost 30. And it brings a lot of thought to most people. Saturn is a wise teacher that brings karmic lessons and a sense of ourselves as mortal. But if we do our work, it can also help us step up to the plate and commit to something of real importance. It's not unusual for people to have a child, a first child often, or to get married or commit to a defined career path during their first Saturn return. And it's not unusual for relationships not built on solid ground to end, but also for significant commitments to be made as well. So whatever the scenario, the Saturn return is usually felt as a significant milestone.
When I think of Saturn, I think of Saturn's rings. Do the rings have something to do with all this?
Well, mythologically, so Saturn was the last planet that could be seen with the naked eye. So it came to connote boundaries, limitations, restrictions, sort of the outer limits. And the rings as well. The rings have been thought of as holding together. Boundaries, again, is another idea that comes up with those rings. So there's a lot of mythology around Saturn that is around boundaries and limitations, reality, the outside edges of things.
You have your first Saturn return. Then you have the midlife transits. What may we expect during these, and how may we best emerge from them?
That's a great question. So yes, the midlife transits, there are actually 4, and they are known collectively as the midlife transits. And they do take place between the approximate ages of 36, 37, and 48 years old. So we may once again find ourselves on the edge of the dark forest when the midlife transits begin. So the purpose of these thresholds is to remind us of why we're here and what we came here to do. And they often bring up themes connected to what's working in our lives and what isn't. And these transits happen very closely together. Sometimes they overlap, and life can feel like a bit of a roller coaster during those years. So they can be a stressful time for marriages and other long-term commitments, as well as career and life direction, because people often find themselves taking a good hard look at the lives that they've built to this point and reviewing, am I really on the path I'm meant to be on? So there's a lot of those kind of questions. They can also be a wonderful time of unprecedented soul growth and self-realization. And these cycles are transpersonal passages that can lead us towards individuation. So becoming more completely and wholly who we are meant to be. The first one is called the Pluto Square. And basically what that means is that Pluto in the sky is making a square aspect to Pluto in a person's birth chart. This only happens once in a lifetime. And it takes place around the ages of 36 to 42 at some point during that age bracket. So it can be a time of intense shadow work. We may feel like we've wandered into an underworld of sorts. A lot of people do feel raw, vulnerable, or exposed during this particular transit, like intense emotions are shaking us to our core. The purpose of this transit is to release toxic patterns, to transform and release old trauma, and ultimately to step into our power. It's about shining a light into dark places, into our psyche, and find what Jungian Robert Johnson called the gold in the shadow. So it is a time also of regeneration, healing, empowerment, and rebirth. And once it begins, it lasts for about a year and a half. The next one is called the Neptune Square, and it typically happens between around the ages of 39 and 43. So during this particular transit, people can feel a sense of ennui or dissatisfaction when they arrive here. There's often a loss of focus. Some people say they feel lost, adrift, that they're yearning for something that they might not even be able to name. Some grieve over lives that they didn't live or choices they didn't make, or dreams that we now realize might only ever just be dreams. A lot of people suddenly feel old, even though they're not old. They suddenly realize, wow, I'm now in my 40s, and that brings with it the idea of, wanting to sometimes hold on to a phase of life that they're no longer living. Some people feel anxious or depressed, wanting to escape. Neptune is about teaching us the medicine of letting go. And the purpose of it is to find deeper meaning in our lives, to realign ourselves with a sense of magic and enchantment that comes with surrendering and going with the flow, to find a connection to the spiritual on our own terms. The next one, the third of the 4 midlife transits, is called the Uranus Opposition. And it typically happens between around the ages of 41 and 45. Now, in astrology, Uranus is known as the Great Awakener. And this transit, this time, can bring unexpected change, sometimes crisis and upheaval, but is usually followed by an emergence of a new sense of self, creative breakthroughs, sudden realizations, and self-actualization. If we've been stuck in a rut or procrastinating, changing something that we deep down know needs to be changed, this transit can be experienced sometimes as disruptive or shocking. And its purpose is to wake us up and to help us to become who we're meant to become, sometimes by dramatically clearing away old structures so that we can grow. So I find that introducing change in small ways and following your soul's promptings can work like homeopathic medicine during this cycle to help you co-create the change that's needed in your life during this time. Now, the last of the midlife transits is called the Saturn Opposition, and it happens between around 44 and 45. You can, people are still integrating these transits a year, 2 years after these exact dates. So it's not like it just cuts right off at any of these ages. All transits or energy cycles wax and wane. So this last one occurs about 14 years after the first Saturn return that we talked about at around 30. And this can be a time of fruition and harvest, but it can also be a time of reckoning. And usually it's a little bit of both. So the purpose of this particular threshold is to cultivate discernment. Saturn will show you in no uncertain terms what's working, but also what is not working in our lives. It's going to bring up self-limiting beliefs and get us to ask that question of what are the consequences of the way that we've structured our life to this point. Saturn asks us to step up and confront the reality of who we've become. Again, whenever we see Saturn on our horizon, it's time for a reality check. So it's about living the next phase of our life with more self-awareness. A lot of people are called to make some difficult choices around that juncture so that their life can more clearly reflect who they are. So that's the 4 midlife transits.
It's so true what you shared about those changes, because from the time that I was about 35 until I was 50, I had so many wonderful and significant changes. Now, the changes were revolutionary, sudden, abrupt, and very, very hard, but important. And then the growth was evolutionary. I remember my path reopening, my spiritual path reopening in my mid-30s, and then leading me on a series of amazing changes and adventures that fulfilled things that I knew as a child, but I had put away. I had fallen asleep. I had not remembered. And in the process of doing so, interestingly enough, in 1993, I think it was, I was 40, and I read James Redfield's Celestine Prophecy. And for those not familiar with the book, it's a story about it's an adventure story, but it's wrapped around a spiritual theme. And the theme is that this gentleman on this adventure was presented with a series of what are called insights. And each of these insights led to another insight. And each time one of these insights came along, you have a choice. You could either dismiss it out of hand, you can embrace it and run with it, or you could put it away for a future date. And every time you embrace it and run with it, it leads to that next revelation, that next synchronicity, which really causes an exponential growth in your spiritual path. And I was living that in my 40s and 50s.
I'm not surprised. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. So now tell us a little about that second Saturn return.
Yeah, so this is a big one too. So between around the ages of 58 and 60, although people do tend to start feeling it on their horizon around 57, 56, 57, you start thinking, something's up, something is shifting. So at that time, Saturn is making another full circle around the heavens, and it's returning to the place that it was at your birth once again. So here we are again at the crossroads, but now instead of facing 30, we're on the cusp of 60. So remember that Saturn's associated with time. And once again, time takes on that tangible and sobering quality that quality during significant Saturn transits. We look back on the story of our lives to this point and we see just how far we've traveled. Typically, we do begin to feel that shift, like I said, on our horizon around age 57, as the realization starts to dawn on us that we'll soon be 60. So we may initially feel a sobering reality about that number as thoughts of our own mortality begin to arise. So for some people, the idea of retirement is not too far off. And while some people look forward to the freedom that retirement will bring, others begin to worry about financial security, stability, hoping that they've saved enough money and have enough to see them through the time that they have left. So there's a lot of these very sobering thoughts that can come up. Health issues also begin to show up around this age, and many people have faced significant loss by now. So either through divorce or the death of parents or family or friends. Other people will become grandparents, so stepping into a whole new role that can bring the sense of wonder, but also a profound shift in identity. So once again, the archetype of reality, Saturn, marks another milestone of maturity, a turning point where we're called to reassess our values. Some of us become acutely aware that there's no turning back. We're now truly on the road to elderhood. And although we're not yet old, our lives still do contain so much possibility. We are crossing a threshold that can bring sometimes fear and anxiety as we face this uncharted territory. Many come to this juncture with some measure of fear that this time will bring depression or stagnation or stasis. But it's really important to remember that it does not have to be that way. While it is true that we're now stepping into a different phase of life, viewing it through an archetypal or symbolic lens can be a deeply spiritual way to align with this rite of passage. So the second Saturn return is the time to distill our life experience and to reflect on what we want to do with the time that we have left. So to revise our bucket list and really look at what gives our lives true meaning. Time to clarify our sense of purpose, to do some serious soul searching. Saturn is, again, it's associated with aging and the physical body. So maybe turning over a new leaf and committing to a new self-care practice can be helpful during this time. We might feel a building sense of excitement as we step forward into this next rite of passage, because now we have earned the keys that unlock the mysteries of the hut of the Baba Yaga. And this can be one of the most powerful and fulfilling times of our entire lives.
And I can speak to so many of my peers and family members who have hit the magic 6-0 and have actually taken on new adventures in their life, including going for new degrees, new areas of study, and new expansion of their work. And it's just amazing and wonderful what we can do in this time.
Oh, I agree. I have so many clients who get a whole new lease on life when they hit their second Saturn return. Like you said, taking on, a master's degree, PhDs, or traveling the world like they've always wanted to do, or starting that business that they've always dreamed of. So it is, although it's the end of one cycle, it's conversely the beginning of a brand new cycle. But it's always got those Saturnian questions of, so what do you want to do with this time you have left? Because time is finite. That's what Saturn teaches us, which can be a beautiful thing, because then we make the most of the time that we have here. So,
absolutely. My guest is Danielle Blackwood. Her new book, A Lantern in the Dark. We'll be back with more of Danielle after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
The future's here and we belong. She can STEM, she can do more. Like build a rocket and watch it soar. Or clean the oceans and make the world a better place. Oh, she can STEM, so can you. Find a cure, invent something new. There's no challenge in the world that she can't face. She can STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM. A message brought to you by the Ad Council.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human. And she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Danielle Blackwood, her new book, A Lantern in the Dark, Navigate Life's Crossroads with Story, Ritual, and Sacred Astrology. What rituals may we employ to aid us at these various crossroads?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say the benefits of ritual and ceremony are becoming more and more accepted as part of the therapeutic process by many therapists around the world. And ritual can facilitate healing old trauma, help to shift your narrative. It can also be beneficial in treating anxiety. It can mark important shifts in our lives and help us recognize our rites of passage. It can help us set new intentions or release something that no longer is serving us. It can also mark a new beginning and bring closure. as well as help us acknowledge the important steps that we take on our journey and bring deeper meaning to our life transitions. So for the Saturn returns, I would suggest creating a ritual that involves crossing a threshold in some way, because that is essentially what we're doing when we are at a Saturn return. We're crossing a profound threshold. So in my book, I do have some great suggestions for rituals. One that is literally a threshold crossing ritual, which you can do at the first or second Saturn return. And then I also, for the second Saturn return, the ritual that I have there, it's about taking on the mantle of power, because that's what we're doing during that 58 to 60 time period. We're moving into that phase of the wisdom keeper. So any kind of ritual to do with moving into a new state can be really helpful for the Saturn return times. For the Pluto Square, which often coincides with shadow work and release, I would suggest creating a ritual for closure or to get in touch with the shadow aspects of self. And in my book, I have written a ritual using a dark mirror to scry, to sort of gaze into, to facilitate shadow work for the Pluto Square. So those are just a couple of examples that I have. But for each chapter, there is a specific ritual that coincides with the themes of that particular energy cycle.
How important is it? We talk about letting go and only retaining that which is for our best and highest good. How important is forgiveness at this stage?
Oh, it's very important, I think. And I do think that a lot of people, when they come to that place, it is sort of not for everyone, but a lot of people, it is a natural place to be, a place of, do I want to carry this baggage anymore? Do I want to carry these feelings anymore? So forgiveness can be such a release and such a setting free of energy that can best be utilized elsewhere in your life.
And that ritual of forgiveness doesn't necessarily have to be directed toward the living person. If someone who has transitioned was somehow hurtful to you, you can do that in any way that you choose.
Absolutely, you can. It doesn't matter if someone is here in the world of form, or like you said, if they have transitioned. It can be healing on many different levels. Also forgiving of the self too. I mean, I think that we come to a certain point in life and we think, oh, why did I do that? Or why didn't I do that? And all of these questions. And I think self-forgiveness and self-compassion is very important, especially during the second Saturn return.
And one of the things that I personally adopted is a ritual of gratitude, a daily gratitude ritual.
Oh, that sounds great. Wonderful. What does that look like?
What it looks like is I look at every element in my life, that which at times I might have considered to be bad, but those that obviously are good. And I say, thank you. I say, thank you for the lessons that you've taught me. Thank you for the gifts that you've given me. Thank you for the opportunities to grow that have been presented in my life. And every day when I wake up, I do my morning meditation. And the next thing I do is I think about all of the things and all the people and events that I'm grateful for.
I love that. It reminds me of the a quote that I often like to use, finding the gold in the shadow, which I mentioned earlier. And I think that, being grateful for even the harder things, the more difficult things, and the lessons that they've taught us, the medicine that they have brought in different disguise, blessings in disguise.
And
Wonderful.
That gratitude is healing.
It really is. It certainly is.
When you're grateful for the lessons that were the hard lessons, the really hard lessons.
Well, those are the ones that bring us that hard-won wisdom, those difficult lessons that shape us into being wise elders. I think that without those difficult passages, we wouldn't learn anything. So, I think that it is wonderful to cultivate that approach of gratitude for even especially the difficult lessons.
Absolutely. It seems like all of life is at a big crossroads right now. I can't remember in my lifetime, I was born in 53. I can't remember in all those years, and we've had many difficult years and times. But the situation that we have in our world right now, I don't remember anything like this. How may people best navigate these challenging times and hold on to their souls, their sanity, and their ability to believe that a better future is coming?
Oh, that's such a great question. So you're so right. The whole world, the collective, really does seem to be at a crossroads right now. And so many of us are facing anxiety around a variety of issues: climate change, gun violence, systemic racism. The list just goes on and on. And it does feel like things are kind of coming to a crux these days. So I think that being present is one of the most important things to keep grounded, to keep centered. As you said as well, maybe cultivating a gratitude practice can be very helpful. And I also think viewing life through a symbolic or archetypal lens, looking for the deeper meaning in our own stories and in the unfolding events taking place in the world, I think that can give us that transpersonal, spiritual perspective that can help us better navigate these thresholds that we're crossing personally and collectively. And Viktor Frankl sums this up beautifully when he wrote, "Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose." So he wrote that in Man's Search for Meaning. A wonderful book.
Absolutely. Very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And from the standpoint of our planet, of Gaia, Mother Earth, are we in a Saturn return? Is Mother Earth in a Saturn return right now?
That would be impossible to answer because we don't know exactly how old Gaia is, but it does feel like that. Well, I'll tell you, the beginning of 2020, Saturn and Pluto were conjunct in Capricorn. Now, this is something that has not happened for a very long time. And if people are interested in reading about the archetypes of sort of world events, there is an incredible book called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarniss, the father of archetypal astrology. And he talks about earlier times when different things have happened, similar things. And it's really quite interesting. He talks about one of the other times that Saturn and Capricorn were conjunct in Saturn and Pluto conjunct in Capricorn was during the plague. So, he wrote this book years before the pandemic, by the way. So it's not like he was comparing them, but he was talking about how whenever Saturn and Pluto come together, there's this end of times feeling. So people start feeling like it's the end times, it's the end of the earth, the end of the world as we know it. And that people not everyone, but some people become very anxious, and there is that pervasive feeling that is in the collective. And isn't it funny how that is very much how it has felt over the last couple of years? And I say we will get through it. And I think that we are going to evolve and we're going to move forward and hopefully learn from what we've been going through.
You talk about archetypes, and one of the archetypes that I'm familiar with is the archetype of the hero or the heroine. Is it time for each human being to embrace that embrace the hero within or the heroine within?
Yes, I do believe so. And that is a thing that I do talk a lot about in this book, A Lantern in the Dark, and in my own work, is that our lives are sacred stories, and we are the hero or heroine of that story. And the hero or heroine does not become the hero without going through those roads of trials, in Joseph Campbell's parlance. So I think that absolutely it's time to step into who we truly are, who we are becoming, and to be present within ourselves as the hero of our own life story.
What would you like readers to take away from A Lantern in the Dark?
Especially that there is hope, that there is magic to be found during these crossroad times. I really love Joseph Campbell's quote that he wrote, "The dark night of the soul comes just before revelation. When everything is lost and all seems darkness, then comes the new life and all that is needed." So I would say that is the one thing that I would like people to take away from this book, is that there's hope, that your life is a sacred story, and that you are the hero or heroine of that journey.
And I think the ultimate answer includes that we all look within ourselves, find love within ourselves and self-worth, and emerge with compassion and love for our fellow humanity.
Agreed.
My guest is Danielle Blackwood. Her book, A Lantern in the Dark, Navigate Life's Crossroads with Story, Ritual, and Sacred Astrology. Danielle, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Absolutely. So you can buy my book at anywhere that books are sold. So in any of the chains, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, you can order it online or through the publisher, Llewellyn, worldwide. Please do check out your local bookstore and ask them to order it. That's always the best way, I think. I'd also like to add that I'm currently focusing on teaching classes from the book for the Crossroad Times. So the first class will begin actually on September 11th. It's on the second Saturn Return. That happens between approximately the ages of 57 and 60. And registration goes live for that next week. You can find me at danielleblackwood.com. I look forward to hearing from you.
Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience, your wisdom, and your lantern in the dark.
Thank you so much for having me, Victor. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.